Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of More Perfect Marketing. My name is David Baer, and today I have my arch rival from Amazon on the podcast. No, I'm just kidding. It's just that I wrote this little book, actually, two books about small business email marketing. But if you go to Amazon and you type in email marketing, one of the very first books you're going to find at the top of the list is my guest's book. I'm talking, of course, about Meera Kothand and her brilliant book, which I know we'll be talking about a bit here, 300 Email Marketing Tips, Critical Advice and Strategy to Turn Subscribers into Buyers and Grow a Six-Figure Business with. And I don't know what it's with because it's cut off here on Amazon after that, but clearly that was a well optimized title for you, Mira, because you've sold a lot of that book, right?
Yes, I have. And thank you for that introduction. But yeah, the book is doing well, and I'm happy that it's reaching a lot of people. Yes.
Well, Meera Kothand, thank you so much for joining me. It's a real treat to have an opportunity to chat with you. What our listeners are going to discover over the next little while that we're together is you got a lot of content out there, and I know we'll be talking about content. Be talking about email as well, but by way of a quick introduction, why don't you share a little bit about what it is that you do and how you help businesses in general?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work a lot with solopreneurs and small business owners and help them go from sub-zero to making a full-time income with their online business. And a key part of the work I do with them is email strategy. So I know email strategy is like this loaded word. So what exactly does it mean? It's basically learning how to mesh email with your larger business and marketing goals. So that email goes from being something that, oh, I have to do it because everyone says I have to, and making it something that is fun, intentional, so that you actually see the work you put into email translating into sales, translating into people that love to find you, buy from you, and so on. Yeah.
It's brilliant. I love playing with email. As you know, as I guess everybody knows now, because I just mentioned it, I've written about email, and I like writing emails. I like the fun of writing emails. And you just mentioned the word "fun" a moment ago when you talked about emails. So I wonder if you can sort of expand on that idea a little bit of what many businesses think about when it comes to email and how they really should change their thinking into it being, a fun opportunity to grow their business.
Yeah, I love that question. So, email, when people think email, they think the newsletter, and that's pretty much what everything that they think about it. I mean, nothing beyond that. So, I think there's so many opportunities beyond the traditional newsletter. So, let me just define what the newsletter is to me. So we kind of just see if we have the same thinking when it comes to newsletter. So for me, a newsletter is where you have an email with lots of different links. It could be links to your content, links to stuff that you've seen around the web. It could be links to your products and services. Typically, you have like a short summary that gives you an update of, oh, this is the brand in the week, or this is what my business has been working on, how we've been doing. There's a picture. And yeah, so this is a newsletter. And I'm not saying that you should be banishing the newsletter altogether, but what I'm saying is if that's the only thing you think about when it comes to email, then I would say you need to reframe or possibly recalibrate what you think about email. Now, a couple of different reasons to why I think businesses should look beyond the newsletter is because number one, newsletters don't work very well when it comes to conversion because there's just a lot of distraction out there when with a newsletter. You're sending people to lots of different places. There are lots of different calls to action within a newsletter. So that in itself kind of hurts conversion. And there was an episode that you did a couple, I think it was two weeks back with Alison. I can't remember her last name. You guys were speaking about content marketing, and she spoke about the journey that a typical buyer takes.
Mm-hmm.
You're kind of like nudging them along through different content pieces, and you're empowering them to make a decision on whether they should choose your business or not. Now, that is something that email is perfect for. So the key formula for me when it comes to email is, does your email what do they need to know and what do they need to believe in order to take action on whatever it is that you want them to do. So if your emails are able to do that, then you've kind of hit the mark. And I feel that a newsletter kind of takes away from that because it doesn't help very much with reinforcing your brand message or understanding your message as well because of the nature and structure of a newsletter. So the type of emails, and I think we'll get into this as well, that I'm suggesting you send are those that help people kind of work back on their objections, kind of the false beliefs that they may be having, and think about what it is that they need to know and believe in order to do business with you, and then send content that aligns with that.
All right. So that was a lot to unpack, and I appreciate that perspective. As I think through what you're talking about, I'm thinking, but I got all these exceptions to that rule, and I think I heard you say in there why in general you don't like newsletters, but they do have their place. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes, spot on. So yeah, by all means, you can send a newsletter, but don't just send that. That should not be the only thing you're sending. Yeah.
Yep. So, I think what you're describing really applies to when a business is first engaging with someone, that person is in a state of mind that they need to address a problem or a desire that they have, and that's when the business is probably best positioned to do what you're talking about. Am I hearing that correctly?
Sure. That's definitely one instance. But I think beyond that, what would be helpful is, and this is something that I share a lot online as well, is if you work around calls to action, like what is important for your business right now, maybe in this quarter or in this month. Is there a particular offer you're pushing, or is there a particular theme that you want to base all your products around? And based around that, you want to work back on your content. So yes, when someone first comes into contact with you, then yes, you want to be sending emails like that, maybe through like a nurture sequence or a welcome email series. But beyond that, to keep in touch with that person beyond that initial nurture phase, I do think there is relevance for emails that are also out of the typical newsletter style content. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm thinking about, one of the ways that we teach, and there's email can be overwhelming to a lot of people, right? Content creation can be overwhelming. And so I'm thinking about the simplicity of kind of two different types of emails. One is that initial engagement where there's some automated emails that go out to somebody specifically around an action they've taken, and that's usually why they've joined your list, right? The second type, again, in a simple model, and you and I can get into some, pretty sophisticated action-based email sequencing things, right? But not for the purposes of this conversation. Um, the second part is how do you nurture that relationship in the long term, which could be automated over many months, with evergreen content, meaning content that could go out at any time and be appropriate for them wherever they happen to be in the relationship with reading your emails. Or it could be live broadcasts that are going out at specific points, and for that, you've made a really good point, which is what is your business need or what is your business focusing on or doing at this point in time? And that may or may not be a newsletter that covers that. Maybe your formula in general is I'm thinking of again I'm trying to think contradictory opportunities here. So I'm thinking about newsletter that I've seen that worked. Once a reader is trained to expect a newsletter and lots of different content, and they look forward to, oh, this realtor in my neighborhood positions themselves at telling me about all the cool things that are going on around town and shares links to all of them, and I appreciate that, and I look forward to opening their emails every week. Well, that's an example of a potentially effective newsletter. Or a business that is, I don't know, in the wine industry, an industry that I know really well, that's sending out news about here's the latest things that have just come in to stock, and the scores that they've gotten for all of you collectors on our list. Here's several buying opportunities with lots of links back to different places on their single site. Those I'm hoping are good examples, whereas what you were talking about in terms of going all over the place for no good reason is a bad example. Am I getting it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you are. So if a newsletter keeps to so-called the theme in a sense, then yes, there is still value. And I think a lot of businesses, they kind of do that pretty well. And one example, just to kind of add on to what you were saying, is someone I follow who he talks a lot about art. So his newsletter links to other people who do really fantastic art online and in different using different types of mediums.
Mhm.
So he links to all of that. So the type of audience that he speaks to is very art focused, looking for creativity inspired kind of things. And yeah, it would make sense. But now if you think about this particular person, and he's an author, when he has a book out there, he kind of shifts the way he sends his email. So it's no longer those curated pieces of content and you should check this out of this good link. He kind of shifts game when it comes to email when he has like an book that's going to be out there, or he has something that he's a particular conference that he's going, he's trying to get his people to that conference. He kind of changes this, the way he writes content. So I think that shift is what businesses need to make. So know why you're sending that email in the first place. And I send a newsletter as well. And when I send a newsletter is when I'm in between campaigns. So if let's say I've got one campaign where I'm maybe promoting a book, and then I have another one where I have a new launch coming up or a different offer, and I have the tiny little bit of gap in between where, it's kind of in between. I don't really want to keep sending my list something to go buy something. It's just fatigue. You don't want your list to get fatigued. So in that space in between that I have, that is when I may send a newsletter. So it's knowing when to shift from sending different types of emails and then sending a newsletter. But what you said makes absolute sense. When your emails are generally focused around a theme and serves the audience, then yes, there is absolute place for that.
I love the distinction that you've made between a campaign where you're getting people to take an action on an offer or an opportunity versus the stuff in between. And I wonder if you can sort of speak a little bit more to that in terms of like how do I know, what too much how much is too much in terms of fatigue, and what is the frequency of or the ratio of, content where I'm not trying to sell them something to stuff that I am trying to sell.
Yes, wow. We can actually dive really deep into this if we want to. I'll try and keep it really simple. So for me, I like to use what I call a launch list. So it's a group of people that I've segmented based on like the tags in my back end. So I know whether they've seen a particular offer before or not. So anytime I launch one offer, let's say it's a digital course that I have a tag for, okay, maybe it's in April, I did a launch. These people have seen this particular offer in April. So I try not to use that same audience specifically if I'm launching very soon. So let's say if I'm doing it in June, for instance, it's not very long, April to June. So I make sure that the people whom I'm sending those emails to in June are those of them who don't have the tag within my system. So I know that these are new eyeballs on this offer. So that is one way I try to reduce fatigue, because you don't want the same person seeing that offer too soon, because it's not just because they said no to your offer now, they didn't take it up in maybe April, doesn't mean that they're never ever going to. I mean, I don't take that assumption, but they might need a little bit of a time before they come back and before they decide that it's right for you. Because most people, when they reply to me, say, Meera, keep selling this to me. I'm not ready right now, but I might be ready sometime down the road. But sometime down the road might not necessarily be in a month. So you want to give them the time and space before they come back and they're able to like, okay, now is a good time. I have the funds right now. Let me say yes to you. So this is one way that I kind of prevent list fatigue. And another way of looking at it is between that time that you've offered it before and now, how many new eyeballs have you been able to add onto your list? So if your list hasn't grown very much in this period of this like 2 to 3 months, then it's very likely the same people who are going to be seeing this thing. So that's one way that I kind of differentiate and I see, okay, should I be selling this thing to them still, or should it be this different audience? So I kind of segment them out in this way. Does that make sense, David?
Oh, it makes total sense to me.
Yeah.
You've brought up a couple of points that I think we may want to explain a little bit more. So you used a term that you and I take for granted that everybody knows, which is tags.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
for the average email platform user, they're probably they understand a list of people who are on their email list, right? They may
Okay.
understand that there are a couple of ways to divide that list up or segment, which is another word that you used, people who have bought and haven't bought from me. But what you're talking about tags, a lot of tools, and it used to be kind of the higher end, more sophisticated tools, but now you see it even in sort of the basic Main Street business tools like Constant Contact and MailChimp even have tagging capability. What does that allow you to do? That I
Yeah.
mean, you're talking about some sophisticated stuff for the average business owner.
Okay. A tag is the simplest way for me to kind of explain that. It's an identifier that you so-called physically place on someone. So, just imagine me kind of like putting like a post-it on your shoulder. So, that's what you're doing with a tag. So you can tag as many people as you want, and you decide what that tag is. So if I'm saying, I want to know who has seen my product in April, based on what link they are clicking, I would basically be putting a post-it on their shoulder, like a purple post-it, and then I kind of label it saying, all right, seen offer in April. So that's a tag. And you can have tags for a lot of different things based on actions that your people are taking. So if you have sent a newsletter and there is a link to a particular page on your site, and you want to know who basically has clicked on that link and seen that page, you can kind of tag them, and keep a mark, kind of like an identifier. So when you see within your system, all right, these people have seen this or clicked this. Now, you can go crazy with tags, but you really need to only have tags for what makes sense to you. So if you are going to need that data or that information, then have a tag. If not, don't do it. Because when I started out, I went crazy with tags, and I realized that I was not using a lot of their tags in any meaningful way. So if you feel like, yes, I need to know who knows this or who clicked this or who took this action, because I'm going to need that information to do something else, maybe create content or reach out to these people, then have a tag. Now, segments, I view it in a slightly different way. I view segments.
I want to interrupt before we do segments, because
Yeah.
you just created a picture in my mind of what's happening at the users or the recipients end with the tag scenario that you just talked about. And I think here's one that most listeners will probably have had this experience. You go to, you click on a link in an email, you go someplace, maybe to check out the price of something or see if they have your size of the thing that but you don't buy. And then, curiously, now this isn't like you put something in a shopping cart, but you just go and you look. Curiously, then you get a follow-up email saying, hey, we noticed that you were checking this out, but for some reason you didn't buy. Now, I'm assuming that was a tag, and they had to plan that second follow-up email in advance and set the entire sequence up to be able to send that second email before they sent the first email out. Is that like a good use of this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I use that very same kind of flow that you mentioned, where someone clicks, they went and looked at it. Like you said, it's not even adding something to cart. They just had a glance at that page. Then, yes, I have the situation where I would send up a follow-up email where I said, hey, I noticed you checked it out. If you have questions, just reply to this email. You can chat with me or DM me or whatever that is. There was a retail store that I went, they have an online store, and I took a quiz, and then it gave me a results to, okay, what type of dress I should be buying based on my body shape. And I didn't take any action beyond that. But then after that, they sent me all of this educational content, obviously kind of dripped out. For this kind of body shape, you should be wearing this dress. And then they would link to suitable pieces of content on their site. So yes, this is also an example where tags are working, and they have actually kind of pre-planned all of this in the back end. So that's an absolutely amazing way to use tags. Absolutely.
So I interrupted you around, you were about to start explaining segments, but I'm going to shift the conversation a little bit because
Sure.
you also mentioned something a few minutes ago about sharing an offer, putting an offer in front of an audience at some point, and then re-sharing the same information to the same people at some future point. And this brings up a question that I get a lot, and I'm curious to hear your answer. Can I send the same emails out again in the future, or do I have to write brand new emails all the time?
Okay, I get that a lot as well. I am all for reusing emails, because most people don't remember ever getting those emails, number one. And when you share that same message again, it also helps with recall, because people typically say, I don't know where I read this, it takes like at least 7 touch points for them to kind of get a certain thing, or remember a certain thing. So yes, I would say if there has been a considerable amount of time. Now, again, we're going to the word, okay, what is considerable? Now, this really depends on your experience with your audience, and like for me, I have reused the same emails like 4 months later. Like that's like my comfort level. If it's like the very next month or the very 2 months, I would not do it. But if it's like 4 to 6 months, I have reused those very same emails. And yeah, till date, I have not had a single person ever reply back saying, hey, gotcha, you send that email. Never has that ever happened. So I would say no, by all means, go ahead and resend it. Of course, take in feedback. If there is an additional question that someone asked that you did not really address in your emails, go ahead and add that in. If you notice that a subject line didn't really work, maybe test out a new subject line. These are tweaks that you want to make before resending the same thing. But if something has worked very well, go, by all means, reuse it.
All right, I'm looking at the section in your book about tips to measure email performance, and you were actually just talking about this in terms of like subject lines and effectiveness. Another guy who is competing for space on Amazon right now is my friend Matt Basak, who has also written, by the way, a very skimpy, 3-chapter book about email marketing. And one of the big points that he makes about email is if you're in sending emails to sell stuff, the metric that you want to be looking at is not opens, it's clicks. And I'm curious to hear sort of your big lessons on this front as well. Like, what is important in terms of things we should be looking at when it comes to the success of email? Obviously, you mentioned subject lines and things that perform well and perform don't, and being able to change them. What else is there?
Yeah. So, the thing with subject lines is people fuss a lot about them, but they're not actually that important. What I've seen matters more and more is the name of the brand or the name of the person sending that email. And there was a research that I came across many years ago, and it really stuck with me, where they said that people open an email because of the name of who it's from. And but it made me rethink who I open my emails and what kind of emails I open. And very often it had nothing to do with the subject line. If I knew this person, hey, this person sends, David sends great content, I'm going to click open that email regardless of what the subject line is. So I think the very first thing is really to make sure your name, your brand is, your audience associates that with value, or audience associates that with great content. And that great content has so many different meanings depending on the niche or the industry that you're in. So yeah, first thing is that relationship, and that matters. And
Before
yeah,
you go on to the second one, I have a follow-up question on the point you just made.
yeah.
I am adamant with my clients that if we can possibly shift the sender to a person rather than a brand, we should, because people have relationships with people a lot more easily than they do with brands. What's your thinking on that?
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I am actually in kind of that situation where I am thinking about changing the sender name for another business that I run. It's kind of like a medical practice that I run together with my husband, and it's very new, and we were thinking if I was kind of deciding on should we switch it to like his name because he has a relationship with his patients rather than the name of the practice. And yeah, I think that makes perfect sense because people want to do business with people, and there's greater connection in that sense. So yes, firstly is the relationship, the association of that name with trust. And I think each, whether it's a subject line or the call to action, everything has um, a different role to play. So your subject line is really just to kind of have kind of intrigue them enough to want to open your email. Now, your name can actually do the same thing because if they kind of associate your name, they're going to open your email either way. Now, your call to action or your CTR, the clicks, this is where it shows that your email or whatever content you've written in the email does the job such that they want to take the next step. So if you see that your clicks, your opens are okay, but you're not getting many clicks, it means that you've not done enough in your email to convince them to take the click in the first place. Or it could also be that whatever you're sending doesn't really align with the audience that you've sent it to. So I always view clicks as being more effective, as in that's the metric that you want to track, because if people are not taking action, then there's no point in you sending emails. Ultimately, you want them to take some action from reading your emails. If they're just reading your emails and not taking any kind of action, even if they don't buy, there is no micro commitment. And I'm a huge fan of micro commitments. You want your audience to take tiny micro commitments, even if it's not a sale. It's click this or open this or hit reply, talk to me. These are things that you want them to do because it shows that your content is effective.
Now, I will say there's probably some exceptions to this, right? There's depending on how you write the email and what reason they have for clicking, right? You could do what a lot of marketers will do, which is a blind click. You know, hey Mira, I just discovered this really cool thing, and I know it's right up your alley. You need to check it out now. Click here. You have no idea what's on the other side of that. A lot of people are going to click, but they're probably not going to be high quality in terms of what they do after they click. Whereas the opposite end of the spectrum is when you give a lot of detail and sell them on the idea of what's on the other side of that click, and you'll get a lot lower number, but
Yeah.
higher quality. And so understanding that there's a difference there is really important in how you're creating that content in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not a huge fan of the first example you shared, where it's very clickbaity in a sense and it's very vague. I would rather, through a series of emails, kind of send different pieces of content that nudge them along their journey and kind of, I don't want to use the word empower, but going back to that formula, and that's something that I actually have it written down, and I would, what do they need to know and what do they need to believe in order to take that action? And I would make sure that every single email I send, it kind of hits the point. And so that I know if my email is they are on point and whether it does justice to the action that I want them to take. Yeah.
A lot of what you're talking about here is not new or exclusive to email. In fact, these are old principles from direct response copywriting. I mean, you were talking about the subject line and what its role is, and it's the same as a headline, in an
Yeah.
ad, which is really just to inspire. It's not to sell. It's not to say, open this email because inside you're going to discover a cool opportunity to buy something from me. Open it now, right? Nobody's going to open that.
Correct.
But if it's really just to get somebody curious to see what's inside, right? you have another section of your book, which is about how email is for people who skim, right? And the way that you write is really to play into the way that people consume it, which is classic for, old school sales copy where there's a lot of sections with a header and people will sort of have a what they call a second path of reading.
Absolutely.
And so I'm curious if you can speak a little bit to sort of the theory and then the application for how do you write for people who skim.
Yeah. So, even if you love someone's emails, there are so many times in the month where you just want to skim and get right to the meat of it. And I kind of learned this the hard way, and it's really drawing on like what you said, going back to the foundation of like when you write a blog, should you have like a single line? How many lines should you have per paragraph? And really the nuts and bolts of that, and testing a lot of things. So I think we all have a different style, but it's what makes it easy for someone to kind of flow through. And when you've done a good job is when someone doesn't even know and then they're halfway through your email, because that's how it should be. And typically I like to start most emails with like a very, very short line, like a hook. Something that the only basis of that is to get them to read the next line, and then the next line is again something short, and then keeps going in that way. So when you kind of train yourself to write in this way, okay, this hook, what is going to get their attention and get them curious and intrigued enough to go to the second line, and then what am I going to say this that has them go to the second line, then very often you would kind of see that your audience would be kind of just breezing through your emails, and that is what you want to train yourself to do. And it starts with kind of analyzing the emails that you get in your inbox. What kind of emails do you see yourself pretty much reading the whole thing, or what emails do you see yourself abandoning? Now that would give you some insight into how you should be writing your emails and what kind of style you're drawn to. So I use a lot of what do you call it, the ellipsis, the dot dot dot. I use that a lot. I have lots of breaks. At most I would have 2 sentences per paragraph, nothing more than that. And it's pretty much drawn from the type of emails that I like to read. And I would also have in every single email, I would have a postscript in there. I would have a PS. It's a chance for you to repeat your link again. So if you have any kind of link that you're sending them to, don't just leave it in the body, but have it in your postscript again. Have like a very, very short summary, 1 or 2 sentences with directly the call to action. Yeah, pretty much keeping it simple. This is what I do. Like study the emails that I like, and then learn from that, and try to train yourself to see what would get someone to keep reading along.
Makes total sense, and I write a lot of my emails that way, where it's one sentence per line. I remember I wrote some email at some point where I was kind of making a joke about the fact that people were complaining about stuff, and I was trying to sell something in this email, but ultimately I left it open to people to reply with what their complaints about me were, and I got like 3 people who wrote back, "Why don't you write like a normal person, and write full paragraphs instead of 1 sentence per line?" I thought it was hilarious that they were actually picking up on the fact I was
Oh
doing this.
gosh. Okay.
So, it's good inside joke for us marketers, I guess, who do that. But you're absolutely right. I know that as I'm consuming emails, especially when I'm doing it on the phone, that my thumb is constantly in
Yeah.
motion, moving right through it, and I feel like it's taking no time at all to consume that email. Whereas if I go to another email where it's big chunky paragraphs, I don't see that same motion or mental connection to what I'm seeing on the screen. So it's a brilliant approach. I appreciate you sharing that with us. There's a ton more in your book, which people can find on Amazon. And I'd love to continue chatting with you about every little detail in the book, but we're out of time, and it's probably best that people pick up a copy for themselves. So I'm curious, what's the best way for them to find that book?
Yeah, so I think David, you will leave the link right below the show notes. So
Yep.
it's on Amazon. It's called 300 Email Tips. So it talks a lot about just just conversation, how to mesh email to their larger marketing and business goals, and take it from, oh gosh, I have to do email because everyone says I should, to something that's, like we said, intentional and actually moves your business forward, and takes people who just found you into becoming brand advocates. I think that's like the main goal, and that's what we would all love. So yeah, that's if emails on their radar, then I would suggest picking up a copy of 300 Email Tips.
Absolutely. Well, there will be a link in the show notes, and I'll also leave a link to your awesome YouTube channel as well, where you share a lot of other tips well beyond just email marketing. And so, Meera Kothand, thank you so very, very much for hanging out and sharing some of your wisdom with our listeners.
Thanks, David. Absolutely.
Indeed. Folks, you've been listening to another episode of More Perfect Marketing. Hope to see you back here again real soon. Take care.